Like metallic rain falling on a city of neon dreams, our stories are both beautiful and piercingly cold. Experience the raw intensity of urban drama through a unique and cinematic lens of high-tech art. Hit subscribe now and feel every drop of the narrative.
My grandmother kept a tin of buttons on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. Not for any practical reason. She had a sewing basket for that. But because she liked the way the light came through the glass and landed on them in the afternoon. Reds and yellows and the occasional pearl. She called it her little stained glass window. When I was small, I would stand on the step stool beside her while she washed dishes, and we would watch the colors move across the wall together without saying anything at all. The house on Maplecroft Lane wasn't large. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch that sagged slightly on the left side, a backyard with a pecan tree that dropped more leaves than pecans. But my grandmother had lived there for 41 years. She raised my mother in that house. She taught me to make biscuits on that kitchen counter, standing on the same step stool I used to watch the buttons. She kept her important papers in a fireproof box under the bed in the guest room, and she told me where the key was when I was 19. The summer I came to stay with her after my first year of college fell apart in the way first years sometimes do. She told me where the key was, and she told my older sister nothing. I didn't think much about that at the time. My sister lived 3 states away and called maybe 4 times a year. My grandmother loved her. She loved everyone. But they had never been close in the way that my grandmother and I were close. I was the one who drove her to her cardiology appointments. I was the one who sat with her during the long February when the doctor adjusted her medications twice, and neither adjustment felt right. I was the one who knew her neighbors' names, who knew which pharmacist she trusted, who knew that she kept an extra house key taped inside the back cover of the King James Bible on her nightstand because she had locked herself out twice in 1 month, the winter she turned 78. My sister knew that our grandmother made good pound cake and had a nice house. When my grandmother's health began to decline in a serious way, not the slow, manageable decline of the previous 2 years, but the kind that changes the quality of the air in a room, I took a leave of absence from my job and moved into the guest bedroom. This was in early spring. The pecan tree was just starting to come back. My grandmother was on home hospice by then, which sounds more dramatic than it felt in the daily reality of it. Mostly, it meant a nurse came 3 mornings a week, and I learned to do the rest. My sister called the week I moved in. She asked how serious it was. I told her the hospice team had said we were likely looking at weeks rather than months. She said that was hard to hear. She asked whether our grandmother had updated her will recently. I told her I didn't know. She asked which attorney had drawn it up. I said I would look into it. I did look into it. The will was clear. The house and everything in it went to me. There was a savings account, not a large one, a little over $40,000, that was designated to be split equally between my sister and me. There was a small life insurance policy, also split equally. My grandmother had done all of this through an estate planning attorney 8 years ago and had not changed it since. I found all of this in the fireproof box under the bed. I did not tell my sister what I found. I called the estate attorney instead. His name was on the paperwork. He remembered my grandmother. He was kind on the phone and practical, which was exactly what I needed. He walked me through what the process would look like when the time came. He also asked, gently, whether I had considered making sure I was listed as the payable on death beneficiary on the savings account, since that would allow the funds to transfer to me directly without going through probate, after which I could distribute my sister's share as stipulated in the will. I had not considered that. He explained that my grandmother, as the account holder, would need to authorize any change. I told him she was still mentally sharp, even if her body was failing. He said that if she was willing and able, it might be worth handling sooner rather than later, simply to make the process smoother for me. I talked to my grandmother about it that evening. She was sitting up in bed, which she could still do then, with the quilt my mother had made pulled up to her waist. I explained what the attorney had said. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, "I always meant to do that. Hand me my glasses." We called her bank the next morning. The banker was patient with us, walked us through the form, and my grandmother signed where she needed to sign. I was listed as the sole payable on death beneficiary on the savings account. The conversation with the attorney and the call with the bank together took less than 2 hours. My grandmother died on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after I had moved in. It was quiet. The hospice nurse had come the day before and told me it would likely be soon. I sat with her through the night, and she slipped away just before 7, when the light was coming through the curtain in that thin, early way. I held her hand. I told her that I loved her and that the pecan tree was starting to bud again, which I don't know if she heard, but I wanted to say it. I called the hospice line. I called the funeral home. I called my mother, who had been gone for 11 years and could not be called, so I just sat with that for a while instead. And then I called my sister. She cried, which surprised me a little, and then recovered quickly, which did not. She said she would fly in as soon as she could get a ticket. She asked about arrangements. I told her I'd already spoken to the funeral home. She said she wanted to be involved in the service. I said, of course. She asked if I had gone through the house yet. I said, of course. She asked if I had gone through the house yet. I said no. She said she supposed that would wait until after the service. She arrived 2 days later with her husband and a rolling suitcase that seemed large for a 4-day trip. She hugged me at the door and looked past me into the house. I showed them to the guest bedroom, which I had moved out of, in preparation for their visit. I'd taken the fireproof box with me. The next morning, I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when my sister came downstairs alone. She sat at the kitchen table and watched me for a moment and then said, "I need to talk to you about something." I poured 2 cups and sat across from her. She said that she and her husband had been going through a difficult stretch financially. She did not elaborate on what that meant. She said that the inheritance from our grandmother's estate would really help them stabilize things. I said I understood, and that the attorney would guide us through the process after the service. She said she was actually hoping things could move a little faster than that. I asked what she meant. She said that her husband had looked into it, and that if both heirs signed off on it, the savings account funds could potentially be accessed more quickly. I asked how he had gotten information about the savings account. She said our grandmother had mentioned it to her once, the amount and where it was held. I said that the estate attorney would need to be involved in any distribution. She said she knew that, but was there any way the account could be accessed before probate was fully complete? I said I honestly wasn't sure, and that I thought we should focus on the service first. She looked at me across the table for a moment, then she nodded and picked up her coffee. The service was on Saturday. It was small, the way my grandmother would have wanted. Her church friends came. Her neighbor from 2 doors down, who was 81 and had known her since the neighborhood was new, stood up and spoke without notes for 4 minutes and said more true things about my grandmother than I managed to say in the prepared remarks I had spent 3 days writing. I held it together through the service. I did not hold it together in the parking lot afterward, and my grandmother's neighbor held my hand and told me that grief was just love with nowhere to go, which I have thought about many times since. My sister and her husband were quiet on the drive back to the house. That evening, while I was cleaning up after the small gathering at the house, my sister found me in the kitchen and said she needed to ask me something. She said that she and her husband were planning to leave the following morning instead of Tuesday as originally planned. She said she knew the timing wasn't ideal, but that there were things at home that needed attention. Then she said that before she left, she was hoping we could go to the bank together and begin the process of accessing the savings account. I told her that the account would transfer directly to me as the named beneficiary, and that once it did, I would distribute her share as outlined in the will. There was a pause. She asked what I meant by named beneficiary. I explained what my grandmother and I had done 6 weeks earlier. The payable on death designation. The form we had completed together on the phone with the bank. I told her that the attorney had suggested it to simplify the process and that our grandmother had agreed and had signed the authorization herself. My sister stared at me. She said that was not what she had been told by her husband, who had apparently spent some portion of the previous 2 days researching how to contest estate distributions. She said that what I was describing sounded like I had manipulated an elderly woman into changing her financial documents. I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment. I felt the floor shift under me in the way it does when something you hoped was not true turns out to be exactly as true as you feared. Not because I doubted what I had done. I had done nothing wrong and I knew it. But because hearing someone you grew up with say something like that to you in your grandmother's kitchen 3 days after your grandmother died lands in a particular way that is hard to describe. I took a breath. I told her that our grandmother had been mentally competent, that the change had been made voluntarily, that the estate attorney was aware of it, and that if she had any concerns, she was welcome to raise them with him directly. She said her husband had contacts and that she intended to look into her options. They left the next morning. Her husband did not say goodbye to me. I called the estate attorney that afternoon and told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he asked me a few questions. Had my grandmother signed the authorization willingly? Had anyone else been present? Was there documentation from the bank? I answered yes, yes, and yes, the bank had sent a confirmation letter that I had kept. He said that a payable on death designation made by a competent account holder was legally straightforward, and that a challenge would need to demonstrate either that my grandmother lacked capacity at the time of signing or that I had exerted undue influence, neither of which would be easy to establish given the circumstances. He said, "It sounds like your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing." I said I thought she had. He said he would send a formal letter to my sister's address outlining the legal standing of the designation, which he said tended to resolve these situations more efficiently than continued family conversation. I thanked him. He told me to take care of myself and to call if anything developed. My sister did not contact me for 3 weeks. When she did, it was an email rather than a call, and it was brief. She said that she had consulted with someone and had been told that challenging the designation was unlikely to be successful. She said that she expected to receive her share as outlined in the will. She said she hoped we could move forward. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and went outside and sat on the porch that sagged on the left side and watched the pecan tree for a while. I had not fully processed, in the weeks since my grandmother died, what it meant that the house was mine now. Not the legal fact of it. I had understood that from the moment I read the will, but the actual weight of it, the way the evening light came through the kitchen window and landed on the sill where the button tin still sat. The way the guest room still smelled faintly of the cedar sachets my grandmother kept in all the closets. The way the porch felt under me. That slight lean to the left that I had always meant to mention to someone and never had. I had grown up knowing that some places hold people even after the people are gone. My grandmother's house was that kind of place for me. It held her. It held my mother, in whatever way places hold people we have lost. It held me at 19 when I needed holding, and at 23 when I drove down for a long weekend and ended up staying 2 weeks, and at every point in between when I needed to remember what steady felt like. My sister had not been back to this house in 4 years before the funeral. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it matters, in the way that things that are simply true sometimes matter more than we want them to. I sent her a reply the following morning. I told her I would be in contact through the attorney to complete the distribution of her share of the savings account, as specified in the will. I told her the process would likely take 4 to 6 weeks. I told her I hoped she was doing okay. I did not hear back. The distribution was completed according to the will. The attorney handled the correspondence. My sister received what our grandmother had intended her to receive, and I received what I had been trusted with, which was not only the larger financial share, but the house and everything in it and the responsibility that comes with both. The week after the distribution was finalized, I had the left side of the porch repaired. The contractor who did it had grown up in the neighborhood and remembered my grandmother from when he was a kid. He told me she used to give out full-size candy bars on Halloween, which I already knew. He told me she was one of the good ones, which I already knew too, but it was still good to hear. The button tin is still on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. I haven't moved it. Some afternoons, when the light is right, the colors still move across the wall the way they did when I was small enough to need the step stool. Red and yellow, and the occasional pearl. I still watch them sometimes. Not for any practical reason. My grandmother knew what she was doing. She knew where she kept the key to the fireproof box, and she knew who she gave that information to, and she knew when I sat beside her with the quilt pulled to her waist and explained what the attorney had suggested, exactly what she was signing and why. She handed me her glasses and she made the call. That is the part of the story I come back to most. Not my sister in the kitchen, not the email, not the attorney's measured voice on the phone, just my grandmother in her bed in the early spring light, already knowing how the end of this particular chapter would go, making sure the ending was the right one. She was sharp until the very last. She always was. What surprised me, in the months after everything settled, was not the anger. I felt some of that, and I let myself feel it, because pretending otherwise seemed dishonest. It was not the grief, which was its own country that I am still learning to live in. It was something quieter than either of those things. It was the understanding that my grandmother had spent decades paying attention to the buttons on the windowsill, to the light in the afternoon, to which granddaughter drove 3 hours to sit in a waiting room during a cardiology appointment, to where a spare key needed to be kept and who could be trusted with it. She had been paying attention the whole time, The house on Maplecroft Lane still has the pecan tree. It still has the screened porch, which now sits level. It still has the kitchen counter where I learned to make biscuits, and the window above the sink, and the afternoon light that lands exactly where it always has. I am still learning how to take care of it the way it deserves. I'm still learning how to be the person my grandmother believed I was when she handed me her glasses and picked up the phone. I think that might take the rest of my life. I think she probably knew that too.